Maya Chen did not own many things she could not carry. That was a choice, not a circumstance. After 4 years of moving every 8 months, base to base, country to country, never quite unpacking the second bag, she had developed a relationship with belongings that most people would call cold. She called it honest. Things broke. Things got left behind. People too, sometimes. The apartment on Linden Street was the first place in 11 years that she had lived in long enough to hang something on the wall. She hung one picture. A photograph of a woman she never talked about to anyone who asked. She was 34 years old, slight, with short dark hair. She cut herself over the bathroom sink every 6 weeks. She worked the morning intake shift at the VA clinic on 5th, checking in veterans, reviewing files, making sure the coffee in the waiting room was always fresh, because she had learned early that a warm cup in a cold hand changed the entire texture of a bad morning. She was good at her job the way quiet people are good at jobs that require patience, without fanfare, without complaint, without ever giving anyone a reason to wonder what she had done before she got there. She ran the park on Thursdays. Garfield Park was narrow and long, sandwiched between 2 rows of apartment buildings, with a path that looped through a small grove of oak trees before opening onto a wide, flat stretch near the fountain. At 6 a.m. on a Thursday, the park was mostly empty. A man with a golden retriever. Sometimes a woman with a stroller who moved with the blank efficiency of someone running on 2 hours of sleep. The streetlights along the eastern edge stayed on until 6:30, and there was a gap between the last light and the maintenance shed where the shadows pooled and held. Maya knew about the gap. She had noted it the first time she ran the path, 3 years ago, the same week she started at the clinic. She had noted it the way she noted every gap, every corridor, every blind corner, every place where the geometry of a space allowed for something unexpected, not with fear, but with the calm, cataloging attention that 4 years of service had installed in her like a second nervous system. She did not think of it often. It was simply recorded, filed. 2 men had been using the gap for 11 days. Their names were Darnell Wyatt and Craig Sims. Darnell was 26, Craig 23. They had a system that was less sophisticated than they believed it to be. They watched from the shed in the early morning, cataloged the women who walked or ran alone, and picked the ones who looked, in Darnell's word, which he used without irony, manageable. A bag, a phone, whatever they could take quickly and be gone before anyone thought to look. They had done it 4 times in 4 months, always in the early morning, always in the gap between the last light and the shed. The police had a description. They did not yet have a name. On the Thursday, Maya Chen ran through the gap. Craig Sims stepped out of the shadows at 6:14 a.m. She felt him before she heard him. A shift in the air, a displacement, the instinctive reading of space that her body performed faster than her mind could narrate. And then he hit her at the shoulder from behind, and she went down hard on the asphalt. Her water bottle rolled. Her right knee hit the ground and opened. She felt the sting of it and registered it and set it aside in the same half-second, the way you set aside a phone ringing in a room you are not in yet. Darnell was on her before she could get her hands flat on the ground. He grabbed the strap of her bag and yanked upward, which lifted her halfway, and then dropped her when the strap did not give cleanly. He said something to her then, a single sentence, low and certain, the kind of sentence that assumes its own authority, and it was the word at the end of the sentence, the last word, the word he chose with the casual confidence of someone who had used it before on other women and other gaps, that changed the situation entirely. Not from the outside, from the inside. Something shifted in Maya's chest that was not fear and was not anger, or rather it was the old thing that lived under both of them, the thing with no clean name, the thing she had first felt at 19 years old in a training exercise that stopped feeling like a training exercise, and every time since then when the world narrowed to a single point, and her body understood something her brain was still catching up to. What happened next took 11 seconds. She would be asked to describe it many times afterward, by a police officer named Reyes who wrote in a small green notebook without looking up, by a woman from the district attorney's office who had a careful, neutral face, by a podcast host named Jordan who framed every question as though he already knew the answer. Each time, Maya gave the same answer in different words. She said, she did not remember deciding anything. She remembered the ground. She remembered the weight above her. She remembered a specific angle, the placement of a forearm, the position of a shoulder relative to its socket, the way you remember the layout of a room you've been in 1,000 times, not because you thought about it but because your body memorized it so you wouldn't have to think at all. She used the angle. The sound Darnell's wrist made was a sound she had heard once before, in a context she kept to herself. Craig Sims ran. He ran without the bag, without looking back. And he kept running until he reached the bus station on Meridian, where he sat on a bench for 6 hours, with Maya's bag still looped over his shoulder, as if he had forgotten it was there, or as if the morning had simply gone to plan and he was just waiting for a connection. Darnell did not run. A woman named Patricia, who was walking her dog, a small terrier named Biscuit who strained at the leash in the direction of the shed with enormous interest, came around the corner at 6:17 a.m. and found the scene. She called 911. While she waited, she offered Maya a bottle of water from her jacket pocket, which Maya accepted and drank from while sitting on the curb with her knee bleeding quietly onto the asphalt. She did not cry. Patricia cried a little. Biscuit attempted to approach Darnell, who was not in a position to object. Officer Reyes arrived at 6:24. He was thorough and fair, and he asked his questions in the straightforward way of someone who had learned to keep his own reaction out of his voice. When Maya answered, she answered simply and completely, and she watched his pen move across the notebook, and she thought about her 9 a.m. intake shift in the way that people think about ordinary things when extraordinary things are still settling into place around them. Her background took 2 phone calls to verify. The second call was to a number Reyes did not recognize, and after that call he put his pen down for a moment and looked at Maya Chen with an expression she had seen before from people who were revising their understanding of the situation they were in. She told him she needed to get to work. He told her she probably shouldn't. She said she was fine. She was. She had wrapped her knee in the first aid kit from her bag, which Craig Sims had not thought to open and would not have found useful if he had. She walked to the clinic. She told the intake nurse, a young woman named Deb who noticed everything, that she had slipped on the path during her run. Deb looked at the knee. She looked at Maya's face. She said okay, and went to get fresh coffee, and did not ask anything else, because she had worked with Maya for 2 years and understood the shape of the things Maya did not share. Maya worked her shift. She checked in 17 veterans. She made sure the coffee was fresh. She helped a man named Terrence, who was 71 and had trembling hands, fill out a form he had filled out 3 times before but never quite finished. She sat with him while he worked through it, and she did not rush him, and when he finished he looked at her with the dignified relief of a man who had been waiting a long time to complete something, and she felt, as she often felt in those moments, that this was the correct use of a Thursday morning. She took the same route home. The story broke local at 4 p.m., when someone at the police department talked to someone at a news station. By 6 p.m. it had a headline. By 8 p.m. it had a photograph, not of Maya, who had not been photographed, but of Garfield Park, the maintenance shed, the gap between the last streetlight and the shadows, which looked on a news camera like exactly what it was, a place where the light ran out. Her name leaked the next morning from a source no one ever clearly identified. She was referred to in the early coverage as a clinic worker, and then as a former service member, and then, by the 3rd day, simply as Maya, which felt strange to read about herself in the 3rd person, as though a version of her had stepped out of her body and was now living in a news cycle she had not chosen. She received 47 messages through the clinic's general contact form. She received a card from Patricia, the woman with the dog, which said on the front, "Sometimes the world surprises you." She kept the card. She put it next to the photograph on the wall. Craig Sims was arrested at the bus station on Meridian at 12:41 p.m., the day after the incident. He was still carrying the bag. When the arresting officer asked why he hadn't thrown it away, Craig did not have a coherent answer. The investigation into the 4 prior incidents moved quickly after that. 2 of the women Craig and Darnell had targeted in previous months were contacted. One of them, a woman named Soo-Yeon Park, gave a statement that took 40 minutes, and that the detective who received it described privately as one of the most careful and complete pieces of witness testimony she had ever heard. Soo-Yeon had been afraid, at the time of her own incident, to report it. She reported it now. She reported everything. Darnell Wyatt was charged. Craig Sims was charged. Their prior records emerged in the coverage and added a layer of context that several commentators chose to ignore in favor of the simpler version of the story, which involved Maya alone, and the word hero, and a kind of tidy resolution that real mornings at 6:14 a.m. rarely offer. Maya gave one interview. She sat across from a journalist named Cass Moreau, who worked for a mid-sized magazine, and who had, to her credit, sent her questions in advance, and agreed not to push on anything Maya marked as personal. The interview lasted 35 minutes. The published version was 12 paragraphs long and was accurate in every sentence. The quote everyone used was the last one. Cass had asked, "Is there anything you want people to understand about what happened that morning?" Maya had thought about it for a moment, a real moment, not a pause for effect, the kind of quiet that means someone is actually considering, and then she said, "They picked the wrong day." She did not say, "Every day has the weight of every day before it, and some mornings you carry that weight like a stone in your chest, and some mornings it becomes something else, something harder and more useful, and you don't always know which kind of morning it will be until it arrives." She did not say, "The training does not leave, it becomes part of the body, part of the way the body reads a room, or a path, or a gap in the light, and you do not miss it, because missing it would imply it ever really went away." She did not say, "The woman in the photograph on the wall." She did not say the particular shape of the grief that had made her come home when she did, or the year of near stillness that followed, or the morning she first walked into the VA clinic and understood, without being told, that she was in the right room, that this was the work, that keeping the coffee warm and sitting with a man named Terrence while his hands shook over a form was not smaller than anything she had done before but was, in fact, the same work in different clothes. She said, "They picked the wrong day." And Cass Moreau wrote it down, and thanked her, and Maya drove home and parked her car, and walked up 3 flights to her apartment, and sat on the edge of her bed for a while in the quiet. Not because she was overwhelmed, because sometimes the quiet is the right place to be after the noise, because she had learned, over a long time and at some cost, to let the ordinary things settle back into place after the extraordinary ones moved through, and to trust that they would. The coffee, the intake forms, the route through the park, the man with the golden retriever who was there most mornings, and who never quite made eye contact but always nodded, which is its own kind of greeting, its own small, sufficient acknowledgement that you are here, that you are present, that the morning is shared. She ran the park on Friday too. Same route, same time, same gap between the streetlight and the maintenance shed, which now had a police notice taped to its door that was already beginning to peel at one corner from the cold. She ran through the gap without slowing. The shadows were the same shadows. The light came back on the other side exactly where it always had. Biscuit was there with Patricia, who waved. Maya waved back. She kept running. The oak trees moved in the early light the way they always moved, and the fountain made its low sound at the center of the park, and the city around her was beginning, slowly, to wake into itself again, the way cities do every morning regardless of what happened the morning before, without ceremony, without apology, without any particular awareness of the individual lives moving through it. She finished her loop and walked the last block home. She showered. She made coffee. She stood at the window with the cup and looked at the street below, which was ordinary and familiar, and asked nothing of her. She drank the coffee. She went to work.